From Creamer Media in Johannesburg, this is the Real Economy Report, our top stories this week. The Housing Development Agency plans to eradicate slums by 2014. We report South Africa's hopes for the China-Africa Development Fund. And the world's largest hydraulic excavator comes to South Africa. The Housing Development Agency was launched earlier this month to gain land for housing development. It'll also target the eradication of slums by 2014. Dennis Ndaba has the story.
Since 1994, the government has built 2.7 million houses, providing shelter to over 13 million people. By the end of this month, about 2.8 million houses will have been built, providing shelter to more than 13.5 million people. It is expected that HDA will fast-track housing delivery.
The Housing Development Agency has essentially been set up with a mandate of assembling, acquiring and then delivering land. Land was seen as the major obstacle in the current difficulties in housing delivery in South Africa, particularly for sustainable human developments. So its mandate is essentially to kind of get into the start of the housing delivery chain and to see if it can't fast-track delivery from that inception point.
HDA has already established 4 projects in the country, one in KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng, Northern Cape and in Limpopo.
Each of those have separate dynamics. The Konubia in Natal project is probably the largest in the country, where over a 10-year period it'll look at delivering a whole new town, 75,000 units, 20 billion rand worth of investment. The one in the Northern Cape is essentially about informal settlement upgrade, and there we're looking at again over a considerable period of time, 68,000 units, R1 billion in infrastructure investment alone. The one in the inner city is around a precinct development in the context of, or around the Noord Street taxi rank. That'll probably deliver around 1,000 units. And the one in Lephalale and Limpopo will look at 5,000 units. So these are long-term projects, and that's perhaps the first thing to be saying, is that they will be delivering over a period of time. But in the immediate 2009 period, what we're hoping to do is get 4 projects off the ground, to do the initial planning, and to in fact get into the ground on each of those 4 by the time this year ends.
Join us after the break when we discuss the deepening link between China and Africa.
Fetch, Fuso, fetch! Good boy. Mitsubishi Fuso, a business's best friend.
The China-Africa Development Fund recently opened its representative office in South Africa. Keith Campbell was there.
The China-Africa Development Fund, or CAD Fund, was unveiled by China at the 2006 summit of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, or FOCAC. It was launched with an initial capital tranche of $1 billion in mid-2007. South African Deputy Trade and Industry Minister Elizabeth Tabeti outlines this country's hopes for the fund.
For us, it's going to strengthen the relationship we have with the Chinese government. So this fund, to us, is a milestone that is going to really help us a great deal to make sure, because this was born in 2006. But then surely you have to follow some processes and let the officials work. And here today we launched this fund. It's going to help us a great deal because, as you know, we are facing an economic crisis, all of us over the world. But I think with the good South African policies that we have, we're able to weather the storm. Thanks to all of those things that we have done as government to make sure that we can then weather the storm. But this fund is going to be a real tool to assist us to make sure that our developmental project will take off the ground.
Dr. Martin Davies, CEO of emerging markets research and strategy company Frontier Advisory, gives his analysis.
Well, I think the timing is most significant. China shows its intent to be a counter-cyclical investor. When we're seeing very much dark financial times in the western sort of part of a global economy, we see China being very assertive, seeking to invest in Africa. This is obviously very news. This is a Pan-African fund. I think the primary interest currently is in Southern Africa. Johannesburg is their initial sort of headquarters in Africa, with a mandate to invest in Southern Africa. So far, the CAD fund's invested in 18 projects on the continent, investing approximately $400 million. Politically, they have to invest another $600 million before October, November, prior to the next FOCAC summit coming up between China and Africa to be hosted in Egypt. The specific sectors, I think, currently are commodities, agricultural land, and also industrial parks.
The world's largest hydraulic excavator, the Terex RH400, has landed on African soil for the first time. Darren Parker has the story.
The 1,000-ton Terex RH400 hydraulic excavator was brought into South Africa through Terex Africa, part of South African integrated leasing and capital equipment group, Eqstra. Its destination was the largest platinum mine in the world, Anglo Platinum's Mogalakwena section in Limpopo. It is believed the RH400 will improve productivity at the mine, as the machine can load 90 tons of ore in one scoop, enough to fill a 300-ton dump truck in only 3 passes.
Well, this is a big piece of equipment, the RH400. Most of the components were made in Europe, but the electrical components were made actually right here in South Africa.
After shipment, the RH400 was transported overland from Durban in 75 separate components on 20 large heavy-duty trucks, before finally reaching the mine in January 2009, where it was assembled on site. Only 10 other RH400s are in operation around the world, all of which are diesel-driven. The new South African RH400 is somewhat different.
Our customer, in this case Anglo, determined that they wanted an electric hydraulic shovel. This is the first one we've built. We've wanted to build one of these because we think there's an opportunity to replace some electric rope shovels with this hydraulic shovel. We think it's a little bit more flexible than some of the rope shovels, and we think it's more productive in certain applications. It becomes a good investment because you are no longer consuming diesel fuel, and it really lowers the cost of production.
Sitting at 8.8 meters above the ground and using feather touch controls, the operation of the RH400 poses a new challenge for operators as well as maintenance staff.
The increase in the staff complement to maintain the RH400, just on technicians, we employed 14 additional technicians. We have trained operators specific to this piece of equipment from the existing local operations. And the technicians of our technicians were trained by Terex Corporation in Germany.
But given the current economic climate of conservative capital expenditure, can more sales of the 130 million rand RH400 be expected in Africa in the near future?
I think there's a lot of potential for the RH400 to be imported. It's the first time that it's been brought onto the African soil, and it's certainly because of its size, it decreases the cost of production and the cost per ton, which all mining houses are striving for.
And now for a sneak preview of this week's Engineering News magazine. Read our cover story stating that the South African government remains committed to the installation of 1 million solar geysers, but that financing and regulatory challenges persist. We report that Oricon, a new global consulting giant based on the merger of Africon, Ninham Shand and Connell Wagner, will focus its energies on large infrastructure project pipelines. And we report that the excess weight on the Airbus's military aircraft, the A400M, won't affect its basic performance. And in Mining Weekly this week, read how South African coal exports are expected to rise in 2009, but that rail infrastructure limitations will determine by how much. We report that the number of mine deaths in South Africa is increasing, with artisans who lack formal mining trade tests involved in many of the accidents. And read how the stricken Pamodzi Gold is set to fight on in the face of Orkney Mine's provisional liquidation. That's Creamer Media's Real Economy Report. Join us again next week for more news and insight into South Africa's real economy.
Prima Media's engineering news has delivered unmatched insight into the real economy. For breaking news, visit engineeringnews.co.za. The Engineering News, not just for engineers.